No,
Good
don't do
evening and welcome to Raconteurs News. It's Thursday evening. It's the 16th of June, so we're halfway through June and we've been having thunderstorms and grey skies all day. What's it been like for you, Jason?
It's been rain. I've been all over the place today, so I've been sort of down to Birmingham and up to Stoke and then back over here, and it's been pretty much the same everywhere. It's grey skies, but it is 16, 6, 16, so we are on sort of like 3 6s in a row. So that could be the reason why the weather is so bad, but then again, it could be something else. Who knows?
Yes.
Who am I?
Yeah, well, it's been quite a bit of a mad day here today, and then Jeff messages me in the chat room just before the show's due to start, and it appears we've got Labour MP being murdered. Very sad news, that.
MP Jo Cox. It's happened in Bristol in Leeds, and obviously our condolences go to her family and everything. No matter what anybody does for a living or whatever their beliefs and everything, nobody deserves to die for them. I just think that people should just keep an eye on the shameless way that the media will use this tragic incident. Already, I've seen an article in the Metro that says that the guy was stabbing her and shouting "Britain first, Britain first," and that obviously has implications for this European referendum coming up as well. And don't forget that the media don't see her as a victim and as a mother and as a parent and an MP, but they just see her as a reason to be able to push their agenda. So I'd just like to, obviously say a big condolences to her friends and family. But people just beware of what you're reading.
Which I share.
Absolutely. Well, that's it. There we are. There's our guest sneaking out before we've introduced him. But without further ado, tonight's pretty special because last time we tried to get this guest on, there was a bit of a tragedy and his beloved dog disappeared. But now, thankfully, the owner and dog have been reunited. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome back to Raconteurs News the amazing David Halpin. Good evening, David.
Good evening, David.
Good evening. Good evening, people.
Now, we got a little list of a few things you'd like to talk about tonight, David. And just looking through that list, I'm thinking we're probably going to have a return visit.
Maybe.
But
there are certain points which I could hone in on. So we don't. I don't spend half an hour, for instance, speaking on the media. Media's in the list, but there are some pointers. That's what I'd say.
Yeah. So, well, how about?
Should we see how we get on, shall we?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you'd just like to sort of give us your reaction to or what you think of what's happened tonight and with this MP, and if you know anything.
Well, my sister, who keeps an ear to the ground and who shares my thoughts and supports me in every way, thank you, Mary, she telephoned about an hour ago to say that Mrs. Cox, MP, had been shot 3 times in the chest, I think she said, and that she had died. And we discussed that briefly. I didn't know what her views were as the Labour MP. I think she's a Labour MP. So I'm not reserving my judgment. I want to hear proper facts, and not, as you say, not to read the agenda of our printed press or the broadcast media. So I feel like the loss of any person of whatever colour and creed and the rest of it. I feel very sorry for her in the loss of her life and for her family. Yeah, I think you said children she had.
She got 2 young children, yeah.
Well, they will be, to use that overused word, devastated. And there's a thing I said it today actually at Brixton to a Probus Club when I was finishing off my talk about Dr. Kelly. I said, I say often that no mother and child should be in the least harmed anywhere in our still beautiful world. And I mean every letter of that sentence. And I focus on the mother and child because that's the icon, but the mother with a baby on her breast is a symbol of peace and security. And here we have a mother, with little ones, you say, who's lost her life. It's no tragedy. Obviously, it was deliberate, unless the person was deranged. And I feel her loss quite deeply.
Mm-hmm. I think everybody here at Raconteurs News as well would echo that sentiment. So yeah, it's just everybody here just their best to the family, and let's hope that some semblance of truth comes through, and hope that some sort of sanity prevails from this, and
yes.
People don't overreact, and we because this again. I just said to my missus, my first reaction was, oh, well, that'll be the MPs voting themselves another £20,000 a year for personal security. And that's just the natural cynical reaction that you have when you've been dealing with these sorts of people.
And the fact is, Andy, we have to say this, that when he comes home, it's that much more dramatic and is the cause of more tears. But there must have been thousands of mothers in Iraq who were shot anywhere in the body, ended up in a sandy grave. Mm-hmm. And that's what, in fact, disgusts me with so much reportage, particularly from the BBC, where death abroad and death of coffee-coloured people mm-hmm. is of no importance. And this person, her death is as important as any human anywhere in our world, having been subject to terrible violence, having been shot.
Yes, that is absolutely terrible. On the subject of Syria, David, I meant to mention to you before we got on air, but I think it'd be okay to mention it on air. I know you said you've been trying to touch base with Eva Bartlett.
I did.
I've just been looking on Facebook today, and Eva is back in Damascus as we speak. Yes. And I've emailed Eva, and I've given her your details, so hopefully she'll be in touch with you soon.
Well, that's good, because I admire her greatly for her courage and for her plain speaking. She writes very well. She takes good photographs, and she knows what's going on. So it would be good to hear from Eva.
Yes, she's a very strong young lady, and
yes,
I know her mother was ill, and she'd been taking her backwards and forwards to hospital the day she did the interview with us. But we didn't realise until after the show, I believe it was the same day or the day after, her mother had a stroke. So a big hand for Eva there for her bravery and carrying on what she was doing.
Yes.
And even now going back into Syria.
Yes, I think that perhaps it's a little more stable on the so-called government side. There's less danger to her. Mm-hmm. Even then, having been to Palestine and having a good knowledge of what can go on, it still requires courage to go there. But she knows that, as Assad knows, that Syria is the linchpin. And if Syria goes down, the Middle East has had it. So had it now.
Yeah.
Sorry, we seem to be having a bit of a issue with Skype there. Are you back again, Jason?
Yes. You're right, okay.
Sorry, you were speaking there, Jason.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know. I was just saying that that journalists and people that are exposing the things that are going on in Syria and reporting the actual truth to what's going on in Syria, that they are people that we need to hang on to, and we need to revere and help along the way. And Eva Bartlett, we've had her on the show, and she's a really, really, really good, great guest and a great humanitarian.
And it's interesting. She's a lady, of course, and it was ladies who spoke from Libya when we were pasting the country. And one of them I know very well. I'd regard as a friend. She's a black person. She was a congresswoman, Cynthia McKinney. She reported from there. And also, I just forget the lady's name, but there was another lady reporter. I'm not sure whether she was professional in that sense, but she reported from Libya when they were doing their best to erase Libya from the map. I think her name might have been Phipps. I can't remember now, but there we are, 3 ladies. And there's no question that women have, I hate the word resilience, but they have a depth to them, which the clubbable male, many males are very shallow in the way they look at things. But women have that feeling right down in their guts, partly because they bear babies. I don't know Eva. I'm yet to. I hope she does write to me. She may not. And Cynthia. They have qualities which we must revere. We must encourage these people. Anyway, that said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not really very. I've heard of Cynthia McKinney, but
yes.
I'm not familiar with her work and what she's been doing. Obviously, I know Eva Barlow as well. So, what did you? What's Cynthia McKinney been doing, and what's her role?
Well, she's been doing a lot. I actually, having said that, I haven't yet haven't had one of her newsletters for some time. But she was a lawyer, and she was in Congress, and she spoke up against Zionism in America, which dominates American foreign policy, and much else besides. That's the fact of it. And having spoken up consistently, they used some rule which hadn't been used for decades to get her out of Congress, and they did. And she did actually stand for president in the Green Party during the last presidential election. But she's very shrewd. She's a good writer, and she takes up quite a few causes. So when the police murdered that black person, I just forget where, I'm sure that Cynthia would have said something in writing and would have persisted.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you make of recent events that have been going on in, particularly we've had Orlando. We had the shooting in the gay nightclub.
Well, I don't know. I have to be very careful. You get sent. My sister told me that, and within a few hours of it happening, that there was a broadcast stating that he had worked, so-called assailant, alleged assailant, for G4S, was working for them,
yes,
was able to carry a rifle because of his job. And then we hear his father was a putative president of Afghanistan. That sounds like nonsense to me. And that he has Taliban connections. That sort of thing. We know what happens. Once these things happen, you get all sorts of stories. But I'll tell you one thing. I'm not going to give my own view, although I'm always suspicious of any mass shooting like this. Mm-hmm. But in San Bernardino, where that Egyptian couple was said to have, was it slaughtered like 19 people? I can't remember now. Amongst a class of, just to do with, I think, slow learners, I remember. There's a photograph of the male assailant, alleged assailant. Did you see this photograph? He's lying face down. It was right by his home, apparently. He's lying face down with his head to the right side, blood leaking from a head wound, and handcuffs on his hands. So here's a man who's been shot dead, I presume, but who was wearing handcuffs when it happened. I think it was probably taken by a newspaper reporter. It was actually widely circulated, but I don't have to think too hard about that. Can you hear me all right, by the way?
Yes, we can
hear me.
We can hear you perfectly well, David.
No, it's perfect. Thank you.
So I will leave that San Bernardino. I am certain was a so-called false flag. There are other things as well about it, and we know that false flags have been going on. In fact, there were false flags in times of Greece and Roman probably, but we know very well how potent they are at keeping the public in step. And the best example, of course, is that cinematographic excess of the Twin Towers. Mm-hmm. And I always say, when people say, "Oh, you don't," I didn't actually. I thought it was real for some months, so I was as gullible as many. Yeah. But I say to people two things: cui bono, what has the Muslim world gained from this terrible killing of 3,000 people, this terrible spectacle? And why did Tower 7 fall when it wasn't?
When it hit by
even part destroyed. It wasn't subject to any physical violence. I'm putting it rather poorly, but those are the two questions always asked, without taking into account things like the hole in the Pentagon and the rest of it, and the fact that you can fly airliners perfectly well by remote. So that was the best, and we could in fact refer back to that, because I would like just to get a sentence in about the bombing of the Afghan people.
Please do,
that started 6 weeks after the so-called 9/11, and people forget. Going back to the MP, Mrs. Cox, am I saying that we don't really feel the pain of others abroad? Not much. I do, actually, a lot. But don't forget what happened in that first winter. There were people fleeing into the icy mountains because of the bombing. And there were many. And you can imagine how many little ones died of cold up in the mountains. We'll never know, and no one bothers to find out. But I'll say it now, that the bombing of Afghanistan, a senior general, American general, spoke to the Pakistani diplomat, and in July saying they were going to bomb Afghanistan. Now, this isn't just a rumor. That was documented.
Yeah.
So another good example of wars being planned well in advance, not wars, but bombing and invasion. And that was, of course, done in the popular mind in reaction to 9/11, where they tied Osama bin Laden to the 9/11 happening.
That is the same Osama bin Laden that was a very good family friend of the Bushes, wasn't it?
Yes, I know. And the whole family, we are told, I have to be very careful about this, we're told that 2 days after, when all flights were in quarantine in the States, a plane left, I don't know, Dallas or somewhere, with the bin Laden family on board for Saudi Arabia. And we also heard later that there were 9 people who were said to be involved, who were earning their living in Saudi Arabia without being touched later on.
Oh, yeah. Are they several of the alleged hijackers who are alive and well and living in Saudi Arabia? Yeah.
So we're told.
That was a BBC report, weren't it?
Yes. I don't know. Yes, maybe. But like the BBC report, of course, which forecasts the demolition, should we say, of Tower 7 half an hour before it happened.
Yeah, I think we could. The whole 9/11 thing is an entire can of worms, and anybody that's looked at it, even in any way other than just reading the nonsense that you read in the mainstream media and the newspapers, knows that there's something wrong about it. I mean, I think that's endemic in people. People do think that there's something wrong. They do realise that there's something wrong, but they just have difficulty sort of recognising it, even though it's in front of their face. Would you not agree?
Well, it's partly people don't like questioning authority, and they know that they're meant to behave, and most of them do. But I'm told, I don't know if this is true or not, that a majority of people in New York don't believe the official story. So I'm told. And we don't get told about the first responders who had to work in clouds of asbestos dust, and who since died or are suffering from mesothelioma, which happens with blue asbestos, which was used, in fact, to coat the steel frame of the Twin Towers to protect it from fire. And as you know, too, that there is no fire caused by kerosene, which will get to temperature, which will cause steel to melt.
Mm-hmm.
There's all sorts of things we can say about it. I heard Mr. Richard Gage, who's one of the originators, one of the people who started off, architects and engineers for 9/11, and he did anything was that his was a very long presentation with dozens of slides. It was difficult to to maintain attention. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
Right, fellows.
We've looked at that from the point of view of architects and engineers, and from the Dr. Judy Wood, the fact that there was possibly an energy weapon used there that made the towers turn to dust, because it appears that...
Well, if you remind me, is it Andy speaking?
Yes.
You've got very similar accents, I think. We could actually, I've showed it today to mostly older gentlemen.
Uh-huh.
We could speak about unusual energy weapons in regard to Iraq. In fact, I think it's very important that I tell you about that, because I find that not too many people, I'm not wanting agreement, but I'd like just for you to hear what I have concluded about it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it's well written up on my website. The website is David Halpin. It's about 3 or 4 articles. One of them focuses on Blair, the ultimate psychopath. And towards the footer article, I discussed what happened to a lady in Palestine with shrapnel who died, a mother, and just picked her out of the vast pool of tears. And also of Ali Abbas, whose arms were incinerated in his home in the village which lay between the Al-Rashid air base, a massive base where the Republican Guard were stationed, the elite troops, and the Baghdad airport, which the Yanks were, with our help, I think, trying to capture because it was going to be a bridgehead for their advancing invasion. But his mum and dad, mum pregnant, and 10 relatives were all incinerated within the house. And Ali, you'll find the images. Actually, images are on the internet, I noticed. But Ali's arms were incinerated. He's armless. He's living in Baghdad now. He's a wonderful chap, by all accounts. He's got married. But his legs, his genitals, and his face, neck, and shoulders were unharmed. But his trunk was burned to a depth of 1 inch, and his arms were just black with the bone showing. And I'm certain, absolutely certain, that this was caused by a neutron weapon, probably a neutron shell. Mm-hmm. And I have a feeling that they were used also in the so-called Turkey shoot in 1991, when they were the Iraqi troops and others were fleeing with the white flag showing. Mm-hmm. And where at some points you hear descriptions of people, Iraqis, being buried alive by bulldozers. What I'm saying is the most terrible, terrible stuff. But it's happened. And Ali, whatever the cause, and I'm sure of the cause, to be rendered armless as a result of some weapon fired by the so-called, what was it called, Coalition of the Willing, it was called, wasn't it? 39 nations involved in that pasting, that destruction forever of a country called Iraq, Babylonia, the cradle of our civilization. But that symbolizes, no one's ever said it, no one's ever written to me and said, you're right, Halpin, or you're not. One chap wrote saying it was napalm. Well, it wasn't napalm. No. I've never seen napalm, but I can imagine what inflamed petroleum jelly does over your body. It doesn't do what happened to this poor boy. Age 9, and he's now 21, or thereabouts. But what we're talking about, I was saying it to Mary, actually, my sister, that they are so ruthless, these people who are running the show. They have no consideration whatsoever for human loss or human suffering. That's my definition of a psychopath. You and I would feel sorry to cause what happened to Ali. We would feel terribly sorry. But if you're Mr. Blair, you can go around grinning like a Cheshire cat from country to country in your private jet, and you feel no regret. You feel nothing of the suffering of the people that you've injured or killed. And that is a very good. What's important? And we shut me up if you want to. What's important about the psychopath, and I write about it a lot, is that they have all the qualities which get them forward and upwards, up the greasy pole. They are good liars, and they can lie with a smile on their faces, which I can't. Can't lie at all, really. So they are charming, they are convincing, they lie, and surprise, surprise, it's exactly the personality who becomes a politician. Not always, sometimes, and who gets the votes of the gullible public. We have to look behind everybody we see who we want to lead us, and we want to get back to looking at the important human qualities, not spin and all the rest of it. But what's this man and woman standing for? What do they stand for? What do they care about? And do they stand for all of us?
Well, that's clearly not the case. I mean,
No.
Tony Blair's being appointed Middle East peace envoy. I mean, there's a man who's responsible for the deaths of at least 1.5 million, and he's a peace envoy. Wow.
The quartet, that was Russia, was involved in that appointment, or agreed to it.
Mm-hmm.
America, Britain, and the UN. I remember that, actually. And have you ever been to Jerusalem, Andy?
No, I haven't.
No, well, there's a hotel there, owned by Swiss originally, called the American Colony Hotel.
Uh-huh.
It is absolutely luxurious.
Uh-huh.
And he had a suite there. I think it was something like $200,000 a month. I can't remember now. But his secretariat was Israeli Jewish. You couldn't make it up.
Mm-hmm.
He was there for about a day or two, a fortnight. Then, of course, he'd fly off to Tel Aviv Airport, Lod Airport, as it should be called. That was the city that was there before the airport was built, Palestinian city, town. And you can imagine that in his journeys by car from Jerusalem down to 30 miles to Tel Aviv, that he would be negotiating some of his vile plans with some of the people in the so-called host country. But that was him as a quartet leader. And as you know, he did nothing whatsoever to help heal the Middle East. Nothing whatsoever. In fact, he added to the hurt. He was planning Libya, no doubt, while he was there.
Yeah.
With others.
Mm-hmm.
Bilderberger or somewhere. I don't know where they meet. But these people are devils. They are devils.
Absolutely, I can't agree with you more than that.
Well,
on
I
that,
thought
David.
you might.
Yeah.
I thought you might agree.
If I can just interject, we've got a message here from the chat room from one of our most loyal supporters. It's Ken,
Yes.
who was actually playing guitar on that intro we played before we came on air, and he's done so many other songs for us. A very talented guy, and he's asking, please would I pass on his admiration for this gentleman. We've never met, but we have communicated by email.
Well, that's very kind of you. And there's no question that art has a great part to play in healing our world.
Mm-hmm.
And when we went, we may talk a bit about the voyage of the Dove and the Dolphin, the ship that my wife and I chartered in the sail from Torquay on the 1st of February 2003 for Gaza, ostensibly. There's no port worth speaking about. It's just a fishing port in Gaza. Had to end up in Ashdod, and then go south across the border into this concentration camp.
Yeah.
But two people, one of the people I took with me, it's a good story. It's a nice story. I heard a man in Boscastle on the north coast of Cornwall, John Morn, singing down by a little bridge there by the stream above the harbour. And his singing was exceptional. You could hear every word.
Mm-hmm.
And he sung unaccompanied. And when I decided, and we could discuss that a little bit later, when I decided to make this voyage, a cry against the looming war in Iraq, but especially to show our common humanity with these poor people. In Gaza, I phoned John, or sent an email later, said, John, would you come on the boat? Because I think it would be good for us that you raise our spirits with your singing. And when we get to Gaza, that you sing to some of the children. Didn't actually sing as many as I would have liked, really, but it was all a bit of a rush. 4 days we were there in Gaza. That was 16th of February until the 20th, 2003. Our boat, this Danish vessel, with a wonderful Danish master, was overtaken by dozens of warships and supply ships en route to the Gulf, because they were going around to smash Iraq. It really was the most, threatening would be the wrong word, looming was one other word, but it was...
I think the word I'd use is contrasting. I mean, you were there going to try and help people, and they were off to kill people.
Off to kill. And the thing is that if you look at the film, if you look at my website and you look at the videos, there's one there called Eyes Open Gaza. It's very dense film, only 20 minutes actually, but it relates the voyage and what we did. And I'm not sure whether it's on the film actually, but anyway, what I was going to say is that John sings a variety of sea shanties, and there's one particular one which was written by an Australian, just forgotten his name, Bogle. He wrote a lot of songs and plays.
Are we still there?
It contains the essence of error in the humanity. They talk about, song talks about the dross, people being impressed by dross, as they are. But there's another man who sings a lot called Mike Silver, and he wrote and sings, it's on the internet as well, I think. He sings a lovely song about the dove and the dolphin. And occasionally I play it in my pickup, and it brings tears to my eyes because it brings back this, it was a remarkable voyage, really. Mm-hmm. And it was, like you said, not for killing, but for healing. And I took up medicine when I was about ages 12 or 13. I read Schweitzer. In fact, Schweitzer was on our vast banner across the mast of this cargo boat. But I read a little book when I was a schoolboy about Schweitzer and the Congo, and that gave me the spark for medicine. I wasn't dead certain of that, but anyway, I became a doctor. As I said today to the people in Brixton, I became a doctor to heal, not to destroy.
Yes. And
what I find so remarkable is so many doctors accept killing. A lot of them will support. They supported Blair, I can tell you, in that Iraq invasion on bombardment. And what you find actually is that I find that people are rather shallow. They don't feel very deeply. They don't think very deeply, even though some of them you would imagine had reasonable intellects, being professors or doctors or whatever, or engineers. But I must say that I find university types, I'm digressing now, the uni types, I find very disappointing. There are some exceptional ones, but most of them, in fact, are real ones of staying the line. So I became a doctor and later a surgeon to heal. I did a lot of that. Great fun it was. But we have to say, you see, like IMPs we're voting for, what are you for? You are Mr. Ben's son. You're voting to bomb Libya. To bomb Libya. Killing about 60,000 people in Sirte. You're voting, or were voting, for bombing Syria. I cannot... I used to say to an anaesthetist who was the first anaesthetist I worked with. I became a consultant, mostly adults, but now and again I operated on little ones with dislocated hips. And we'd be, perhaps as I was sewing up, closing up, as we say, I would be, we'd be talking about a politician or a manager or something, or perhaps even a doctor. And, I'd say, Peter, humans are disappointing. And I'm afraid they are, Jason and Andy. And we have to whittle out the wheat from the chaff, and find out the ones that are disappointing, and cleave to the ones that have got spirit, and you know what's right and what is wrong, and you are life-enhancing, another of my little expressions, not life-denying.
Absolutely,
so
David.
Are
yes.
life-denying. So they won't feel much pain at all about the youths stuck in Calais, even though they're there because we destabilized and ruined their countries.
Well, David, you mentioned there about you became a doctor in order to heal people.
Yes.
I mean, something we push very much with our radio show is natural remedies, because it appears the education of doctors and training of doctors has been hijacked about 100 years ago by the Rockefellers, as far as we can gather. And so really they start off on all kinds of false premises, and we've discovered this amazing guy called Rick Simpson, who's rediscovered an ancient plant called the hemp plant, which has got all kinds of healing properties, and Wolf are encouraging the...
he doesn't smoke it, does he?
He says it does have certain benefits.
I've spoken quite a bit on Ian Crane's AV. I've spoken twice, I think.
Oh yeah.
And it was a great boon to me, and a boost, because there's a big audience. He's very good at gathering people together. But he has quite a few people who promote, should we say, alternative medicine. Well, I'm certainly a skeptic about some modern drugs. I'm skeptical about immunization of certain sorts.
Yes.
But I will not say that medicine, for instance, I will not say that many modern drugs are not logical and necessary. I take 4 drugs, it happens. I won't tell you about one. But one is thyroxine. If I didn't take thyroxine, which I forget how it's made actually now, but if I didn't take something which replaces my thyroid, and my thyroid packed up actually when I was terribly ill in 1992, as a result of overwork and fighting Thatcher's internal market, and for our wonderful orthopedic hospital, which was later closed and became a housing estate. If I had not had thyroid, in fact, it was diagnosed too late. Not too late, but it was diagnosed late. But I was grossly hypothyroid. My thyroid levels were very low indeed. And if you persist with that for very long, you die. You also can go mad. You die because you get atherosclerosis, so you get your arteries clog up. So that's one thing I'm on. And I'm on another thing called sotalol, which is a beta blocker. Now, I have that because just every now and again, I really mean now and again, I get a burst of atrial fibrillation. It usually lasts 24 hours and goes. And we discuss anticoagulation before some people get often prescribed. I'm glad I'm not on anticoagulation, but I am on sotalol. And although it's a bit of a nuisance, makes my hands go cold in the winter, it does prevent my heart from going into AF. Because the risk of AF, and this is the important thing, you're talking about alternative medicine, the risk of AF is stroke. There's no drug, no natural remedy I know can stop that, as far as I know. There's a whole range of drugs like dovetailed, looking at it in the garden now, foxglove, salicylic acid from the willow. There's a whole range of drugs which have been derived from the natural world, and I'm all for that. What I am for is the most scrupulous surveillance of any new drug that comes on the market. And I agree with you about doctors being tied like Siamese twins to drugs. Not every doctor, but some doctors. And there are financial incentives, for instance, for prescribing, I'm told, for the practice, prescribing statins. And statins is a jolly good example of a drug which has some very serious side effects. And I've got great reservations about that. In fact, I was told to have it 4 years ago. I refused it.
Well, sorry, can I? Because I've just taken the. I've got all these things you've been talking about. I'm on anticoagulants. I'm on warfarin. Yeah. I'm also on statins now. I've been recently cutting my statins down. I've got a condition called antiphospholipid syndrome, which is also known as Hughes syndrome as well. Sticky blood syndrome, I think, is the generic term for it. So I'm on warfarin, and I'm also on statins. Now, I've been reading a lot of stuff about statins, and I'm on quite a high dose of statins as well. Now, I've not really been suffering from any real side effects of them, but I have reduced my dose in the last couple of weeks. Simply from what I've been hearing, even in the mainstream, they've been saying that cholesterol's not necessarily a bad thing for your heart.
Yes. Well, there's been a certain amount of publicity, and there's a book circulating, which I think has been out some years actually, about that. But I cannot comment on your medication. Is it Andy speaking? Obviously, I can't. But the thing is that these things, sometimes patients will, the internet, there's a thing called NHS Choices, which is, I think, pretty good on the whole for drugs. There's a thing from Mayo Clinic, which describes each drug if you Google it. But there's every reason, particularly now, there's so much more knowledge being shared amongst people. There's no reason at all why you should not take part in any review of that with your own doctor. Say, look, I'm a bit worried about statins, and perhaps you've done this already. But, people should do that. You see, the other day I was saying this to my wife, that statins, about 12%, it is said, people become diabetic on it. But I reckon that's a very important complication. Since diabetes also induces vascular disease. It's also said to affect memory. And there's a few other things as well. Pains in the legs and a rather dramatic side effect, which can happen to very few, but it's a dramatic side effect. I won't describe it over the air. But that it's something which the patient, if he knows about it, but that's what the point I was making. Supposing it's someone who's living on their own, who already, in fact, is quite a bit elderly and forgetful, and they're given this drug, how the hell do you know when they go downwards that it isn't the drug? Because no one's looking at them, or they tend not to be looking at them.
No, absolutely.
And that I find quite disturbing, actually, really. I could give you quite a few instances of that, actually, where medication was being given in an unwise way. But I think a lot about that. Okay, should we press on?
Yeah. Well, I'd just like to add to
so
that.
I'm not sold on in my woods, I have hypericum, St. John's wort. Now, the Germans describe that for depression. So there's another good example. I think they find it useful for people who are depressed. So there's lots of things which come from the natural world, but there are drugs like penicillin. I was at the medical school at St. Mary's where penicillin was discovered by Fleming. And that saved thousands and thousands of lives in the Second World War. And it's been derived, and other antibiotics have been developed. But although there's a downside, that they're overused for rather more not the most pressing conditions. That was an advance. Again, it was a natural product, a mold. So it fits your bill in a way. Anyway, I think we could be all evening on that. I'll retreat. Don't you want some music?
Well, we usually play the music at the top of the hour, David, but I'd just like to...
Okay, how are we doing?
I love, if
you can guess, the communication is one word. I love talking to people, and we don't talk enough to each other in this country.
Absolutely. If you
get under brass tacks, people's eyes glaze over, and you feel awkward. Yeah.
David, if I could just jump in there, I'd like to add something. We do speak to some absolutely amazing people that really blow our minds. Yourself, you're right near the top of the list with people like Eva Bartlett and Rick Simpson, who's rediscovered the cannabis for curing cancer.
Yes.
And we also have a gentleman that we came across, a friend introduced me, and he's an engineer by trade, and he started working on how trees get the sap from their roots to their leaves. And we were all told at school that it's by capillary action. Yes. Now, capillary action can't work above 10 metres in height, so how on earth does it work with giant redwood trees? And Andrew's done a great deal of work, and he's found that he's got a very good explanation of how it all works with gravity. Now, he's applied that to the human body in the circulatory and lymphatic system, and he's devised something he calls inclined bed therapy. Now, we had Andrew on when he was talking about this, and we've had the single biggest response of any guest we've ever had. People are still contacting me daily to tell me that it's changed their lives. It's changed my life. It's changed Jason's life. And all you do is raise the head of your bed by 6 inches. Now, I'm glad you brought this up because this Tuesday, we've got quite a seed change for Raconteurs News in that we're going to have a professional sportsman on with us. Now, the professional sportsman is coming on with Andrew K. Fletcher, the said man with the inclined bed therapy. And that professional sportsman is Tony Moran, who a few weeks ago, at the age of 42, and whilst homeless, won the WBF Cruiserweight Boxing World Championship. And he is paying great tribute to Andrew and the inclined bed therapy because it not only works for sick people, it also works for fit and healthy people. And Tony's saying how about 30 years as a fighter, 27 years as a fighter, he never slept in an inclined bed, but suddenly he's done that for just over a year, I think it is, and suddenly his powers of recovery have just gone off the scale. I saw a photograph of his hands the night after the fight. They looked like two tenderized steaks, and after one long night's sleep in his inclined bed, they were back to normal. There's no swelling or anything. So that's something I'd just like to plug that's coming up this Tuesday, 8 p.m. on Raconteurs News. And I'm really looking forward to that. And I hope that by getting a professional sportsman on, we'll be able to widen our audience. Obviously, there are a lot of people who tune in to hear Tony, and we'll never see him again. But I think some of them might like what we're doing and hopefully stick around. Yes,
well, the only time I've used that position is, or advised it, is for people who have a hiatus hernia, where the stomach contents might trickle up into the esophagus and cause them heartburn. So they were often advised to put blocks under the head of the bed. But usually I was getting people to put blocks under the foot of the bed because they had an ulcer or had swollen legs or whatever. Anyway, what is the time, by the way?
The time is just coming up to 10 to.
10 to, right, okay. Fine.
Right, shall we get into the BBC? I know it's on your email. Like you wanted to talk about media outlets and particularly the BBC.
Yes.
So what's your take on
my take?
How the BBC are reacting?
Well, the other day, I get lots of things from 38 Degrees, you reviewed as well, and one of them was they were concerned about political control of the BBC. There was a suggestion that the government was going to have, I think, several members of the government on the board, something like that anyway. They wrote saying, would you sign a petition against this? And I'm sure they didn't read my reply, but I said, the sooner the BBC is destroyed, the better, taken apart. Because, we can talk about the history and Reith and the rest of it. If you look in my email sidebars, BBC, you'll probably find, 5 dozen letters to BBC, often to correspondents. Some of them respond, like Keith Sykes. There are some good ones. And on my website, there's quite a lot as well, actually, there as well. I've hardly ever had any satisfaction from my complaints about important omissions or important lies and much else. And there's no question that the BBC is an engine for war. You will know that they studied the broadcast before the Iraq War, done. The casus belli was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, a la September dossier 2002. But But I've already indicated, you know, that they found no weapons of mass destruction.
Yes, absolutely.
We can speak about that. In fact, I need to speak about that in a minute in regard to Dr. Kelly. And yet, I'm certain that we used weapons of mass destruction. And that nice fellow Hoon was quoted, and I'm quite sure it was a true quote, was saying that if Hussein's forces used chemical weapons, there were no hesitation in using nuclear weapons on the Iraqis. You didn't know that, did you? But that's the fact. Now, so they were, the study by the chap up in, professor in Glasgow, showed something like between 3 and 9% of broadcast time was given over to people who opposed the war. But the vast majority of it was given over to people who were promoting the war. And there was a succession of what you could call Ziocons. They were Zionists. Some of them had dual nationality between the US and so-called Israel. And these Ziocons came on night after night after night. Pearl, Bolton, Wolfowitz, I can remember some of their names, but all the message was that Saddam Hussein was a great danger to the world, and he must be eliminated. Of course, eliminated the country as well, not just Saddam Hussein. But that's a good example of what they're about. So it's no question of taking a neutral view, a neutral analysis, and broadcasting the pros and cons. They broadcast the people speaking the pros. And I think that cannot be forgiven. If I was running the show, I would disbanded them there and then. But they're at it all the time. They've been misreporting Syria. And there's a man called Panel, one of their journalists, and there's a very good man called Robert Stewart, who's, should we say, a freelance journalist, and he has used tremendous effort in showing that one particular day when they said there was a napalm attack on this village, on showing that the whole thing was a concoction. He's gone, last of all, to the Charity Commission, because the charity involved in this, Not Helping Hands or something, run by warmongers, in effect, and a doctor was involved, a Syrian doctor lady. He has shown that the whole thing was a concoction and that the intent was evil, and the Charity Commission, surprise, surprise, have just brushed it aside. So that's just one example, small example. Don't forget, too, that people never remember this, but the BBC showed a mass grave. Do you remember this? In Syria?
Yeah, I remember that.
Maybe, anyway, there were lots of children in shrouds. They were children because they were small persons, over 100, and it was published. And, of course, it sticks. Once you throw filthy mud like this, it sticks. Many people who see it believe it, and they won't ever be turned away from it either. But an Italian photographer came up and said, hang on, that was my image, and I took it in 2004 in Iraq. Now, I think that should be subject to, I think the people, the editors and whatever who put that in, and they knew what they were doing, be sure of that, those people should have been in court in some way. I don't know what law you could get them on, but I think it is absolutely intolerable. We all know it goes on, but we have to go on putting up with it. So,
yeah. Have you heard of a gentleman called Jerry Croft?
No.
No, Jerry. Well, there's a gentleman called Jerry Croft. He's an American guy, and he does these lectures. They're available on YouTube.
Yes.
And they speak about that, how the media. One of his videos is called "Propaganda and Manipulation: How Mass Media Engineers and Distorts Our Perceptions."
Yes.
And it goes into that and it gives examples of how many times certain stories were mentioned in the mainstream news, stories that had happened on similar days, but obviously in different geographical locations, and it's startling.
It is startling. And the problem is, I think actually people are getting the message a bit, but when I speak, I haven't spoken to a sort of general audience for quite a long time now, but when I mention my loathing of the BBC, I know quite a few people in it, actually. Almost everyone nods their heads. But that, of course, is a selected audience. And there are many people. This is the other thing too. If you want propaganda to sink in, then you choose propaganda where there is to use propaganda on people where there is existing prejudice. A good example is a Muslim.
Yeah.
The Muslim is dirty, dirty Arab, all sorts of things come back from childhood, and so they use that a lot, and they'll try and blunt it a bit with Islamist or something. No, that doesn't blunt it. It adds to it, really. But you choose people, if you've got people who are already, in fact, prejudiced, and this happened in Germany eventually before the Second World War, then that works well. It sinks in. And so if people want to believe something, they do. And that's Hitler's lie is another thing. Hitler, it wasn't his propaganda minister Goebbels, it was Hitler. Hitler said, if you tell a lie, make it a big one. Because people are used to knowing that people tell small lies and will be suspicious. But if you tell a big lie, like 9/11, it goes down a treat. So that's another thing. Now, another thing, too, is, do you know about Edward Bernays?
Yes.
Well,
yes, he was...
Oddly, I'm speaking now for the BBC. The BBC commissioned him to make 4 one-hour films. Names escape us around, actually, but they are remarkable films, partly for the footage that they captured from all over the place. But Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And Bernays knew how to manipulate the public mind en masse. And they used it to promote cigarette smoking in women before the Second World War. And they used it to get America on side for the Second World War. And other things as well. But he knew it. And one of his famous quotes from him is that you don't need a government if you've got the public mind. And that's really what they've got now.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Was he the Torches of Freedom guy, weren't he? That's what he said. He said that women were gathering with their torches of freedom, and women
you're right.
With all smoking cigarettes. He'd hired some women to smoke cigarettes.
That's right.
In Times Square.
They had a parade through New York with glamorous women smoking fags. But you see, Bernays had it. He wasn't the first. And Orwell saw it very well indeed, actually. I quoted, not Orwell today, but 1984, where we were divided. It was a mechanical society. I forget, people were born oddly. But there were 3 grades of humans: alphas, betas, and epsilons. Well, the epsilons are the drones that do the work. And it's a long time. I read it as a boy, but I was quoting it the other day, in fact, in regard to NHS, because they are using words which have no... There's another thing about propaganda. Choose a word which means nothing.
Yeah.
They're using a word in the health service. You'll see all over the place. You go on NHS England, you'll find about 50 pages on the search engine of well-being. Now, you tell me what well-being means. It means nothing. You can't measure it. But they are now having health and well-being clinics. And at a meeting with the clinical commissioning group, well, I can hardly mention it actually, all GPs, with 130 people typing away at their screens in this big office. I got up and said about well-being. I said it comes straight from 1984. I'm not sure about that, but anyway, it had a ring about it. I said, imagine someone who was sick in psyche or soma coming up to a sign for help, and it had health and well-being clinic. It's right out of Orwell, actually. And people can't see it. They go on parroting it. And they're doing it partly because they're all part of the machine. And the machine is, I digress again, the machine is, this is the health service, destabilize, demoralize, ask what your friends who work in NHS feel about things, dismantle, the 3 Ds. Yep. Destabilize, demoralize, dismantle. And that's being done mostly with psychological techniques. So they managed to demoralize people by a whole variety of things, partly because almost every day the BBC tells you about some terrible clinical mistake or failure of clinical medicine. So people think, Christ, it's not worth keeping, it's so bad. So there we are. So
Yep.
the mass psychology is another thing I'll say quickly. I've said this wrong time. I said I bet the government have psychologists working for them who are expert in mass psychology. Do you know what it's called? It sounds quite benign if you look at it, but it's a cabinet unit. It's now a private firm, surprise, surprise, but its ordinary name is the Nudge Unit.
The one in it's the BBC. It's in the government, isn't it? It was on the BBC, wasn't it? The Nudge Unit.
Oh, we'll give the BBC a clap on the back then. I'll withdraw it. But anyway, that's what. But that was about manipulating. Well, it isn't as direct as that. Of course, they dress it up. But what they're doing, they're seeing people's reactions and how they can, like, for instance, advising on obesity. They're seeing how they might nudge the public mind.
Yeah, they use phrases such as helping the public make good decisions. Things like that.
They do that all right, yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well,
okay.
That first hour's flown by, David, and
it's gone by quickly, has it?
Absolutely. Well, it always does.
I imagine I bored your audience stiff.
No, they're absolutely hanging on your every word. What we'll do now is I've got 3 minutes and 10 seconds of music lined up.
Yes.
It's from another great icon, a little bit like yourself, but perhaps slightly better known. It's from a guy called John Lennon. So we'll be back in just over 3 minutes.
You're listening to RaconteursNews.com. Stay tuned for more untwisted, unsweetened news. Please consider buying a t-shirt or making a donation to help support us. Thank you for your support. We do it for us all.
Good evening and welcome back to Raconteurs News. I think David's just still away getting himself a drink. So while David's doing that, I'll just give you a reminder of some of the great guests we've got lined up. And that's thanks in no small part to Jason, who's lined a few of them up, to Luby Lou in the chat room there, who's doing sterling work in the background. Thanks, Luby. She played some great tunes to get us all in the mood tonight. And she's been booking the guests. And we've got Tony Moran and Andrew K. Fletcher coming on Tuesday, as I said before. Then on Thursday, we've got a return visit from John Hamer, who will be talking about his new book. Then on the 28th, we'll be joined by Joanne Summerscales, formerly of the MASH Project, or MASH Files, sorry. Joanne's rebranded herself as the ET Newsroom, and she's got a new book co-written with Bill Brooks, which is now available on Amazon, called The 44. So Joanne will be talking about that. And then on the 30th, we'll be joined by Rob B. And breaking news, we haven't had time to add it to the schedule, but Rob Freeman will be joining that conversation as well. So that will be a pretty explosive one. And then we go over into July. On the 5th of July, we've got a young Canadian lady called Priscilla Una, who learnt to sing and taught herself to play the guitar. And very quickly, she started her own record company. And she's a pretty wide-awake young lady, so look forward to talking to her. And then on the 7th, we will be joined by Steve Smith, who I made contact with yesterday out in Colorado. And he's treating people's pets with CBD. So that kind of goes along the Rick Simpson and the hemp plant lines that we are so fond of here. And the one I've just booked today is on the 12th. We'll be joined by Tom Crawford and Guy Taylor for an update on what's going on there. I know that Guy's buzzing because he's fresh from his victory in court with his no case to answer. So we've got some great guests lined up, and no doubt there'll be more going on the schedule soon. We're waiting for a few answers from people. But tonight we're joined by the amazing David Halpin. Are you back, David?
I am. Yes, I am.
Great. Okay. So, yeah, we were... where were we before the break?
Can I just interject?
Please.
Well, sorry, were we talking about BBC?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, carry on. Sorry.
Well, shall I kick off? In fact, it takes in two of our subjects, the BBC and Palestine.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, my sister sent me an email tonight. She keeps me in touch with everything. Ramadan, is a festival lasting about 3 weeks, etc. Israel, this is from Independent. Israel cuts off water supply to West Bank during Muslim Holy Month. Tens of thousands of Palestinians left without access to safe drinking water in sweltering heat. Jenin is involved, and that has 16,000 refugees from 1948 and from 1967, probably. But that it might have been reported on the BBC. But every day I get a bulletin from a couple in Wellington, New Zealand, the Braveries. In fact, I think about 80. They're elderly, but they sit down and they receive bulletins from Palestinians in what I prefer to call Palestine. So this is not always up to date. Usually about 3 days lag. I'll just read out. It won't take many minutes, actually. What goes on? Now, the BBC won't be reporting this. Israel army destroys 2 Palestinian wells. Stone-throwing settlers, those in the West Bank, so-called, injure 2 people, damage vehicles. Israeli soldiers raid hospital. Night peace disruption and or home invasions in 12 villages. That means around 2 o'clock in the morning, some Humvees roll up with their klaxons blaring. The house is surrounded by armed soldiers, and sometimes someone is abducted, perhaps someone was a boy. But you can imagine how the village must feel when this happens suddenly in the dead of night. 18 raids, including home invasions, 1 beaten, 3 injured, 3 acts of agricultural sabotage, like the glyphosate sprayed on the wheat crops or whatever, 13 taken prisoner, 1 detained. And then in this list, Palestinian missile attacks, none. And I suppose that 1 out of 100 reports like this contain a record of some missile being sent out. But the BBC doesn't record. This is ordinary. This happens every day in every year, and yet we don't hear about it. Quite a few English people, British people, would I think, respond with concern to stories like this. But BBC will report the killing of 4 Israelis in a Tel Aviv cafe about 10 days ago, but they won't report this. And this will include killing by rifle fire as well. So I make my point that the BBC reporting and all the other channels, to be quite frank about it, apart from RT and Press TV on this particular score, has vast areas of omission, and it is omitted so that the population feel that Israel is a decent country, and any people to concern yourself with is these damnable Palestinians who are such violent people. That's the message.
Uh-huh.
What do you think about that?
Well, I'd just like, if we had a fair and just media, I don't think the world would be the way that it is.
No, I agree with you. It is absolutely crucial, and it isn't, and it gets worse, actually, as you know. It gets worse, and there's no one standing up. I just told you about Robert and his action and his work in this report is focused on quite a small lie of the BBC, to be frank about it. but he's taken it to the very people who might have made a difference, the Charity Commission. But that's what happens. And it's happened with Dr. Kelly. I'm saying this to the Provost gentleman today, that every avenue has been closed off in a remarkable way. They must have had a big team of people going around, shutting people up. But you cannot get down. You have no witnesses to what happened to Dr. Kelly. And it's done, of course, the BBC in fact reinforced that too, by various means which I could describe. But that is, so we have wall-to-wall silence when it matters. There should be no silence. We should know that the country which we set up for destruction in 1917, the so-called Balfour Declaration, all 126 words, that a country which we have prime responsibility for, and the people, then about 1 million in 48, that although we should feel the burden completely.
Yeah,
we're made not to feel concerned. These people are stigmatized, the Arab generally, not the Palestinian actually. I think a lot of people know that the Palestinians have got a fair case, but they feel impotent in the face of a wall-to-wall media and a wall-to-wall government. They don't damn well care. At the moment, it's worth going on a bit about this. There's a good colleague of mine who's a psychiatrist actually, and he used to sit on a committee which was about torture and trying to stop it. And as you know, torture has become more widespread. You know, people were being boiled alive in Uzbekistan until Craig Murray blew the whistle. They're torturing people all around the Middle East, and we've tortured people. We tortured people from Northern Ireland, as you will know. And but what this doctor's doing, and at one stage he had 700 signatures from other doctors, he's spoken about the torture of children in Israel. You can hardly say it, can you really? Children, boys, up to the age of 18. And a lot of them are kept, solitary confinement is used, and that's torture in itself, that's defined as torture. And at the moment there's over 400 boys, a few girls actually, in prison in Israel, Palestinians. And anyway, Derek has done it, carried out, brought this campaign through in a very professional way. And about 5 years ago, now I was involved in some ways with it, he wrote to the World Medical Association. Well, the president then was a Dr. Blachar, Blachar. He's an Israeli doctor. It died, this petition really, was just kicked into touch, even though it concerned the gross maltreatment of children. So much so that someone would never recover. If you've been tortured, some people never recover their personality. Terrible when I think about it. Well, I don't think about it a lot. Anyway, he has brought it to life again. There he has, and this time it was 67 doctors who signed up with him, including myself, with a very good friend who's been to Palestine with me on several occasions. And it's been sent to, you can hardly believe it, to a Dr. Marmot, who's got a vast number of decorations and honours and things, who's concerned for the less well-off in life and the people who are disadvantaged, supposedly. He happens, actually, I think he's a Zionist too. We didn't know that. But anyway, he's just sent this letter to people, to a doctor or so in Israel, in Blachar again, and it's just died again. It's been kicked into touch. And so, anyway, I've made a suggestion as to what we should do now, because publicity is what you need for this. Getting, of course, is very difficult. But it is our duty, in this country, if everybody knew about it, if every mum and dad knew that boys of, say, 14 were being snatched and kicked into a Humvee with tight plastic handcuffs on and taken to an interrogation centre in the middle of the night without a lawyer present, without their parents present, if they knew what was going on, the country should be sort of marching by the million. Doesn't happen. We're all asleep.
Yeah.
And that's partly because the media do not tell of this. Now, there was actually a visit by some lords, from House of Lords, a few others visited, and they produced a report which had a certain amount of kick in it, but nothing happened. And that's because, of course, people are complicit, and they connive, and they think this is reasonable to do to other people's boys. I think it's atrocious. There's no words for it.
It is absolutely dreadful, David. If I could just come in there, we have been getting quite a queue of questions for you, but
right, okay,
do hate.
Fine. I'm game.
Well, one is you just mentioned Dr. David Kelly, and it's from Mithrin, who's submitted most of the questions tonight, and I know he's had this one waiting since the last time you were on, and we didn't get a chance to ask it.
Right.
He's asking, is Dr. Halpin aware of any link between the death of Dr. David Kelly and the untimely death / suicide / murder of Michael Todd, Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police?
Michael
Todd.
Yeah, I remember. One of my colleagues in our little group was very concerned about Todd, and felt that, he was suspicious about it. And for a variety of reasons. I think he was also smeared after his death, which of course is the technique they used. They did it with Kelly to an extent.
Yeah.
But he was also concerned about the death of the Labour
Robin
Minister, Cook.
Yeah.
And Cook's, of the two, I would focus, it's extraordinary, people don't question it. Well, I'm sure people do in the rank and file. But it's never discussed at national level. He was with his wife. I don't forget she was a civil servant. And he was on a mountain which was owned by the Duke of Westminster, which was of some interest. And the investigation of his death was, I think, somewhat perfunctory. Either there wasn't. It's under the control of the Procurator Fiscal in Scotland. I'm not sure whether he had a post-mortem and a hearing, or whether it was a post-mortem. I can't remember that. But I remember thinking that it was all pretty shallow.
Yeah.
There we are. So, Todd, shall I say that I never looked at it in any great detail, but my colleague was very concerned about it and went into some detail about it. But I couldn't see a connection between him and Dr. Kelly.
Okay.
Dr. Kelly, I didn't make this point today very well, actually, to the people in Brixton. I told you about Ali Abbas, and I told you that I believe that he was injured so terribly by a neutron weapon.
Yes.
I am absolutely certain of that. Now, the whole reason for the casus belli for the invasion and bombardment of Iraq was weapons of mass destruction. I think I might have said that earlier. I did. So, here we have, just imagine that if it got out that we were using weapons of mass destruction in our destruction of Iraq, you can imagine how the sofa cabinet of Mandelson, Blair, Straw, there was a civil servant, Powell, and a few others sitting there with their Sauvignon Blanc discussing the progress of the war. Because this is what happened with Kelly. Now, no one else, I said it actually on my website, I think, in an article there for Global Research. And I'm not saying this that I have any sort of sense of pride, but it's interesting that no one else has come up with it. Very important. Kelly had been to Iraq 37 times with UNSCOM. They were kicked out in 90. Well, they weren't kicked out. The Yanks, Clinton, bombed Iraq badly. Operation Fox, it was called, in 1998, and they had to come out because they were then regarded as persona non grata by the Iraqis, I'd imagine. The UNSCOM thing was mostly about, I think, spying. They would go around and find radar installations for that were used for ground-to-air defense. And so that was what he'd been doing. He then, in fact, then the war happened. And then another thing called the Iraq Survey Group took over. I've written about about that to a man called Kay, who, in fact, I'll be blunt and crude. Kay got out. He was pissed off. He said there are no weapons in this country, the WMD, and he left it. But as part of the Iraq survey group, because Kelly was an expert in germ, particularly, and chemical warfare, less so perhaps, he wanted to go back to Iraq. I think they wanted him to go back as well to see what was going on, what they'd found. So the war, don't forget, was started on 22nd of May, 2003. In fact, there were forces there 2 days before, the Australian SAS, I understand. And here in May, Kelly went back to Iraq. He had trouble with his visa at Heathrow, which is a bit extraordinary since he was set up by the MOD and by the Foreign Office. They both employed him, in effect. Anyway, he got to Kuwait, which was in the hands of the Polish forces. He was arrested, in effect. His cell phone was taken from him. He was confined to a hotel, and he was sent back to Britain the next day. His daughter Rachel said he was very disappointed by this, as I think we would all be. So that was in. So you think, that's odd. What the hell are they doing? This man who's respected so widely, including in the US. He had the highest security clearance in the US and in our country. In June, he goes back again. He's confined to a beaten-up Air Force barracks of some sort. Pretty poor arrangements, apparently. He's confined to that. He's not allowed out and around Iraq. But when he's there, or just after he comes back, I can't remember exactly which, the Yanks had found 2 machines, wheeled machines in the desert. And there was a great hoo-ha because, we found the WMD that has justified this war. And there were, you can imagine, the Sunday Times, all the propaganda came out, aerial photographs, big diagrams, this and that and the other. They asked Kelly, what are these? He said, I just listened to this, they are what they say they are. They are machines for producing hydrogen for artillery balloons. Now, just imagine, this is what I'm trying to get getting across to you. Just imagine the sofa cabinet. They would be, in fact, choking on their Sauvignon when they hear of this very revered weapons inspector, bacteriologist, saying they are what the Iraqis say they are. In fact, gentlemen, ladies, they were produced by British Aerospace and sold to the Iraqis. So, I think, this is my view, I think that they felt that Kelly was getting loose-tongued, and to repeat the expression, he was pissed off. I'm sure of that. He was fond of the Iraqis. On the Millennium Night Eve, he met with 2 other men who had qualified with him, who had graduated with him in Oxford, the little college. And you know what Kelly put in the time capsule that they arranged? An Iraqi army cap badge. Now, I just say that. I'm not saying it's important or not. I think it's odd. But here's a man with 3 daughters who's seen it all, who's debriefed the Soviets, interestingly, on their germ warfare thing, whereas the Americans continue with theirs, and the Israelis with theirs, no doubt. And here he is seeing the whole thing like a house of cards, all evil, all destruction. And I think that's what this is about, actually. I think. That he was going to blow the gaff.
Absolutely. Oh, yes, that is very telling indeed, David.
Well, no one else. Sorry.
The thing that I think about David Kelly is that I don't think he would have got into the position where he was without some sort of intelligence background or some sort of intelligence handler or some sort of intelligence operative that some
Well-
sort of intelligence background, and so I think he was an example of somebody that went rogue, sort of a whistleblower. And
Well, we don't know that, Jason. But and I don't think actually that he was. I didn't tell you this, but he was acting head of Porton Down for which was it's got its defence comes into it. Of course, always use the word defence, but it has all sorts of functions. But one of them that was to keep an eye on what other countries might be making in the way of germ weapons. And don't tell me that there isn't some discussion or some activity about ones that we might have found. I think sarin was first found by us. I think I'm digressing slightly. The thing is that he worked very closely with security services, but he was there because of his particular expertise in bacteriology. And what you might say is that, you probably know this, that MI5, MI6 types are often picked up as clever graduates. I'm sure you know that, particularly in Lonsbridge, I think, or in Exeter, and they end up, of course, in the Foreign Service or whatever. But I bet Kelly wasn't. But he ended up, obviously, applying and getting a job at Porton Down. And then it develops. I don't want to say he was swept along, but he was paid by the MOD, but I think employed by the FCO or other way around. It was an unusual arrangement. But there's no question that he was, as I said, given the highest level of security. One of my colleagues found that out, both in the US and in Britain. But what I really want to emphasize is my impression from reading it all is that he wasn't per prime a spy. I think he was a very expert man whose knowledge about germ warfare, in particular, was taken in by, was used, recorded, noted by our lot. Our lot. Okay, that's enough of that, I think.
Thank you, David. That's.
Right. Well, I have to say, I don't get the impression. You see, he joined the Baha'i faith, and that was partly because of Mae Peterson, this American, who probably was attached to one of the intelligence agencies in the States. She was his interpreter. She spoke Arabic, and it was her who was absolutely certain that he didn't take his life. And she wanted to give evidence at the Hutton inquiry. I'm just trying to remember what it was. There was something which they went over there, the coppers, heard her, and I think came back saying, well, she hasn't got very much to add, conveniently, because she was happy to give evidence on certain conditions at the Hutton inquiry. Mae Peterson, American. They made a thing about that he had an affair with her, and that was part of the smearing, and that his wife was fed up, what have you. I haven't seen any evidence of that, but I can't speak to that. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you've covered what you wanted to on Dr. David Kelly there.
There's a great lot. But let me just say this, that my sister said, very interesting. My sister said, she sent me an email.
Mm-hmm.
She's listening to the program.
Oh.
What I have to say this, I say it quite firmly today several times, is that the reason why, I'll just spend 2 minutes on this. A colleague who I later got to know, who's had to retire for medical reasons, he investigated the Office of National Statistics, along with, interestingly, a Syrian doctor who was also in public health. And they looked at the records and ended up finding, I think, one case of possible death from hemorrhage from slashing of a wrist. They went on to say that for practical purposes, this did not exist. This is where the press comes in. This is in September. That's only about a month after Hutton finishes his hearing, but long before his report. And they write to the Guardian, Independent, and then the Mail, not one of those papers, published their letter based on facts from two doctors. Not right, you see. We want to keep this quiet, the Kelly thing. Actually, the Mail has been very good about it, generally speaking. That was one thing. I've been thinking about it, but I didn't want to upset Mrs. Kelly and the three daughters. I wasn't obsessed about it, I can tell you. But I decided to write. I was writing then for the Morning Star and subscribing to it, and also, in fact, often donating money to keep it on its, keep it living, because it struggles. And on the 16th of December 2003, I wrote a letter saying I could not imagine that cutting both arteries in the wrist would cause sufficient hemorrhage for sufficient bleeding out for the person to die. In fact, it wasn't two arteries, it was one. It was cut straight across. If you cut an artery straight across, it shuts down pretty quickly. Any surgeon will tell you that. So you don't bleed to death from cutting your ulnar arteries on the opposite side, the radial artery, not easily felt, that doesn't matter. But you don't bleed to death from cutting the ulnar artery. So that was my letter. And then I got drawn in to a little group of people who were studying his death already. A lady, actually, who was not a professional, but who was very good at collecting people together. And then two doctors and then a few more. And one of them was a very lovely Jewish surgeon from Barts, Bernstinkle, who was a general surgeon, but he had a special interest in blood vessels. And in fact, at one time, he was president of the Vascular Society. Mm-hmm. Martin, like me, said, you do not bleed to death from cutting the ulnar artery. That was the first cause of death. Yeah. The second cause of death was the swallowing of 29, assumed 29, we can talk about that, coproximal tablets, not the paracetamol, which takes about a week to kill you, at a good dosage, terribly with liver failure, but the dextropropoxine, which is a depressant drug, not like morphine. Yeah. But that was the second cause of death, and they added to that coronary artery atherosclerosis as a final kick. But that was it. But the reason why I tell that story in some detail is it just shows you how important it shows you how important it is for information to be exchanged. My letter wasn't of a conspiracy theorist. I was saying, as a surgeon, I didn't reckon that was very likely. And I also said in this letter, which is on the internet as well, I think, in saying that, I said, here we have a man of deep scientific knowledge who chooses the most uncertain method in which to kill himself. If the idea of a scientist like him of cutting his wrist, see, I've dealt with cut wrists about, I might have had a dozen in my time at Victoria Hospital. Uh-huh. Usually they're distressed young people. They come in, often with quite deep wounds. You don't actually bother about the artery because the artery is not bleeding, but they've cut the median nerve and you repair that and some of the tendons as necessary. Uh-huh. But we still talk about a cry for help. They may even have known that they wouldn't die from cutting their wrist. Some do. Some might think they could die, but you have to do it different ways. I won't go into that now over the air. But do you see how this is something else? You see, these people are good at illusion. They are good at illusion. We mentioned 9/11. Yeah. We mentioned Bernardino. I can think of quite a few things actually, but illusion captures people's imagination, and a lot of people. And I had journalists say to me, BBC journalists, in fact, I know very well, who said that he was at the hearing, and there was no question that he did not commit suicide. Well, I just remembered I didn't talk about this morning. Just listen to this. When the searchers found him, and one wonders whether the searchers were showing the right direction, up on Harrowdown Hill, near Southmore, about a mile from his home, he was found dead, slumped, sitting against a tree. That was Miss Holmes with her dog Brock. Brock had picked up the scent of this human. Her colleague, a male called Chapman, then called the police. That was at 9:20 the call was made. There was a cordon around the corpse by within 8 minutes. Work that one out. The whole thing stinks. Now, this does stink. I forgot to mention this morning. When Coe came, the two people, they saw people, he was a detective constable, the two police, or two men, he was seen with, there were three people, Coe being the leader. They went to the corpse. He was there until other police arrived, and then later on the pathologist, Dr. Hunt. But when Coe was there, the body was stretched out with the head a little distance from the tree. And Bartlett, one of the paramedics, I don't know, was a lady, just forget her name, Bartlett said there was a gap sufficient for him to squat at the head end of the corpse and apply electrodes, to do an ECG. I think a fairly useless exercise from my view, but anyway, he did it, but there was a gap. So we have a corpse that was sitting slumped against a tree, and Hutton has a photograph of that apparently, we never saw it. And the next thing is, an hour, about 40 minutes later, the policeman is recording that he was laid out with a gap between the tree and the head. At that point, Jason and Andy, the police should have said, someone should have said, certainly the coroner should have said when he gets to know about it, this is a murder inquiry. No suicide changes position from sitting slumped to lying down away from the tree. Do you understand me?
No, absolutely, yeah.
It's grotesque. And yet, we've all had to swallow it.
Yes, well, and
the thing is, it is grossly unlawful, and there should have been, as I say, it should have been right. Stop everything. This is a murder inquiry.
Yes,
because there's no explanation that the moving of the corpse was not explained and possibly had a malign reason, a malign basis.
Yes, it appears to me that was a big part of the cover-up, and that brings me on to another great question we've got from Mithrin here, and he's asking...
From who?
From Mithrin.
Mithrin?
He's in the chat room.
Yeah, and he's asking, why does the Doctor imagine that rational people do not see things as we do? It clearly has nothing to do with IQ.
Yeah, that's right, and I think about it quite a lot, but it's not easy to put into words. But existing prejudice is one, and that's a big thing. If they don't, well, I cited the Arab as an example. If people have a down on Arabs, then they will tend to believe untrue, foul stories about Arabs.
Yeah.
They may feel the same about people who are indolent, who rely on state subsidy for their food and their living. And that's quite common, actually. And I'm quite sure that a good example comes to me immediately as a neighbour. The health service, as I indicated to you with those three words, which I think are a good summary, the health service is under attack. It's being done quietly by all sorts of, and I indicated that too, with sort of well-being junk, but it's being done with a mass of people. You wouldn't believe the people who are involved in it, in NHS England and where have you, and with the people they employ as, inverted commas, consultants. There's been millions on that as well. But the people who support this dismantling, this tearing apart of our health service, they say we can't afford the NHS. Now, I counter that. I'm well off. I have a good pension from the health service, and some people might say that, well, Halpin, you deserve it because you work jolly hard. Helping all sorts of people when you were working, and that was arranged. Of course, I contributed to my own pension. But some of these people have 36-foot boats down at the marina on the Dart. And else places, some people have 2 holiday homes. And they're saying that we cannot afford it. Well, I counted this today. In fact, I did get on the health service with these rather good men actually in progress. I said, in about 1943, and in the Denmark Straits, HMS Hood went down, having been shelled by the Bismarck. I think it was.
Yes.
How many people died in that? And you can imagine the superheated steam escaping everywhere and people being scalded to death below decks.
Yeah, that would have been absolutely horrific.
1,400 men died in that ship. 3 survived. And I've said in a letter somewhere that from the depths of the Denmark Strait, those men are still saying, look after our wives and our daughters and everyone as best you can. So the spirit, what they call the post-war consensus, which led eventually to Nye Bevan and others, National Health Service, that was the spirit that was present then, when we were bankrupt as a nation, when we couldn't bloody well afford it. Can't afford it now, you see these people say. It arose from the people, from the spirit of the people who'd sacrificed a lot, and all sorts of sacrifices, even the women back home, managing on meagre rations and what have you. But that's what we've got. So we got people who are very well off telling me and you that we can't afford it. We can afford HMS Prince Charles and HMS Queen Elizabeth with aircraft carriers which won't have aircraft attached to them, the F-35, for some years probably. And they're having to adapt the flight, they're having to put one of those jump jet type things on the decks. The waste. And that's what is happening. And I'm afraid that a lot of people in the population will be agreeing with them. That's what's about. And I found, this is the saddest thing of tonight, speaking to you, is that the population that I've been trying to rouse up, I've been writing in regional paper for 12 years about the health service. The first article was your NHS going, gone. That was the first article 12 years ago. I can recall about 2 or 3 letters of support from other people. They don't care, and that's what Bevan said, it will exist as long as people have the will. He said that actually in 1948. And I'm afraid to say that at the moment, it may change, the moment people do not have the will. And they might be keen on alternative medicine or whatever, but when you've got a cancer in your large colon, and it's perforated, you want help. And you want help from people that know their onions, and in the service which doesn't, in fact, look in your wallet, first of all, because most people can't afford private medicine in this country, and they never will. But that's happening, and that's a lot to do, going back to it, we can't afford the NHS. And that's because of a prejudice in that person, only 2 doors away. He's well off. And he cannot see that he should be thinking of a person down the road who has done his jobs, retired, but could never afford to pay for his own medicine. So he's only thinking of himself. And that's the other thing. So it's prejudice and self-interest. And we could talk about other things as well. Those are what come to my mind.
Absolutely, David. Time is running quite short now, and I know one of the things on your list that you particularly, I would imagine you particularly wanted to cover.
Well, let me just, can I leap in?
Sure.
The community, just to finish the NHS, I've been fighting with a very small group for our local community hospital, or hospitals too. They now want to close the 2, and plus 2 others, 60 beds in all. Mm-hmm. It's very, very, very important for the district general hospitals, big hospitals, to have somewhere where they can discharge patients who aren't up to scratch yet, where there's some skilled medical nursing help available. So they're closing them. I'm fighting like hell, but I'm getting discouraged because I don't think the population worry enough about it. They don't see it as very important. Or they're just going to shrug their shoulders and say, oh, well, that's what they want. That's what they've planned to do. And they're going to lie down under it. I'll leave that aside.
Yeah,
2 more things quickly. I want to tell you about fascism. I use the word a lot, and it's used perhaps rather, what should we say, rather loosely. And it isn't an easy thing to define at all, actually, really. Just looking at desktop. I'm not very good at remembering quotes and things. Desktop, here we are. And then I'm going to go on quickly before we finish to the ODED Enon plan. I'm going to ask who knows about it. I hope I've answered Mizrin's letter moderately well.
Yeah.
Moderately well.
I'm sure he'll be happy with that. Yeah.
Well, let's hope he does.
Okay.
Let's now just in fact focus on other things for the time being. Here we are. Now this is the thing is, if you're going to say a word, if you're going to use a word, you need to be able to define it so that those who can attack you, those who will attack you, will have no defense, because you say, okay, well that's how you defined it. This is my definition of fascism. Now there is a quotation from Mussolini who said that fascism was a combination of the state and the corporation, and that in a way meets the present conditions quite well, actually. My definition: the subjugation of the individual's will and freedom, it's important, the freedom bit, by an overweening state. Overweening, overpowerful. Humanity withers, freedom of speech is stifled, and the soul dies. Self-preservation becomes a dominant drive. Now, that's what I've defined it. If you Google Milton Mayer, Milton Mayer, he was a German Jew, emigre to America with his family as a lad, I think, or youth, in 1936. He wrote a book called The Germans. They thought they were free. And there's a quotation from him on my website as well, but I quote it a lot because he describes how the public, in essence, wait for someone to react against evil, in effect, but they're all waiting for someone else to act. And gradually, everyone changes. And I think that's quite advanced in this country. I mean that quite a lot. Now, ODED Enon plan. In 1984, a man called Oded Yinon, who was probably, as they say, an asset of Mossad, produced a very short plan, but you'll find it on Global Research. I think I've referred to it as well in several of my writings on my website of David Halpin. But Yinon described how Israel, as it's called, Palestine as I call it, how Israel would decimate the Arab countries using religious divides like the Shia and the Sunni and the Alawites, to much less extent in Syria, tribal differences, and all the rest of it, to break up the Arab nations so they no longer existed, or they were Bantustans, they were just little bits and pieces, balkanized. And I've been writing about it for about 8 years, and no one else was, in fact, much, or at all, actually. But I notice now it's, in fact, quoted a lot in articles. But the fact is that Oded Yinon's plan, it just wasn't his plan, but he wrote it, he was in the so-called Foreign Affairs Department, is they are halfway there. Because one of the Zionist dreams was a state, an entity, between the Nile and the Euphrates.
Uh-huh.
And that's what the Oded Yinon plan is all about. It fits also with the American project of the New American Century, and there's another thing that came before that. I forget the title. But the PNAC, which people ought to read if they don't know about it, but it's vile, it's very forbidding, but the drive is for full spectrum dominance of the land, of the sea, of the air, of space and cyberspace by the US. And they're trying very hard, almost halfway there now as well. They have 700 foreign bases, which you probably know. That was ODAD non-planned. And you see, without you knowing what might be behind some things which are happening, you won't actually get the trick. You won't realize what is going on. But that's what's going on in Syria. And if you, either on my website, on videos, or on YouTube, just Google David Halpin, Syria, I'm interviewed by a very nice journalist who will no longer interview me because they've been told to be fairly kind to Israel, I reckon. But it's not a aggressive, it's just an outspoken interview over 10 minutes about what was happening in Syria for 5 years ago now. Crikey, 5 years ago. No, not then. Anyway, it was 2011. That's it, actually. But I gave my view then. I spoke about the cuckoo and the buzzard. It was from an article. She picked it up, and then I was called to the studio to be interviewed. And although I say it myself, it was a good interview because it hit all the right nails on the head, what it was all about. It was about destroying Syria for colonization by another state. And if you're interested in videos, you don't mind, and they're not long, some of mine are, there's another one, actually, which is outside the High Court, when I made a singular attempt to get permission for a judicial review of this Attorney General, Mr. Green. And it's a 10-minute interview by Press TV. No one else interviewed me in a recording. And it is really, I again speak my mind. I speak about lying. I point down the strand. I say there's House of Commons. There's lots of lies there. I go on to say that PR is lies. Of course it's lies. And that's what we're up against. But what I find sad, Jason and Andy, is that so few people are moved. As it happened, some of the men were today in Progress, and one chap got up and said, how is it, nice big man, he said, how is it that our establishment is able to, did I say this before? I did, forgive me, is able to silence anything it wants.
Yeah.
That's it.
And it's a huge machine. It's a huge machine, and we're really up against it. But I think we've come to the end of our time, don't you think, Andy? I think we're right at the very end.
We've exhausted you.
No, absolutely. It's a pleasure speaking to people like yourself, David. And I do hope that you will be able to come back and join us because
of course I will. Yes,
times.
Our world is in big trouble, and it's our duty as citizens of the world. I'm a world citizen, not a Britain prime. Our duty is to find out and speak out.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you very much, David. It's been fantastic.
Bye-bye, fellas.
We've had a couple of hours.
If you could just hang on the phone, I would like to have a brief word with you when we get off air, David. It'll be about 2 minutes. Okay, thanks everyone for listening. Thank you so much to David for joining us tonight. You've been absolute mountain of knowledge, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you, Jason. You've done brilliant tonight, as always. And thank you to everyone that's supporting us in the background. And whatever you do, stay tuned for Dr. Rock tonight, because he'll be pulling apart the in-out EU referendum. And I know, as always from the doc, it's going to be a great show. So we'll leave you with a little snatch of music, and the doc will be along at bang on 9 o'clock. And if it doesn't happen to start in your player and you're on the chat room page, just refresh the page when it's gone 9 o'clock and the doc will be along. Okay, thanks everyone for listening. As I always say, if it wasn't for you, we'd be just talking to ourselves. Thanks everyone, and good night. We'll see you Tuesday.